Сегодня у нас гость, Сегодня у нас гость из Facebook, Муртаза. Он работает 8, даже уже 9 лет в Facebook. Он родом сам из Багдада, из Ирака, но на данный момент он работает в Фейсбуке, в Сиэтле. Он работает в отделе internet.org, который развивает интернет в развивающих странах. Еще помогает развивающимся разработчикам получить работу в таких больших компаниях, как Facebook, там, Netflix, Fun. Сегодня будет он объяснять, как пройти интервью, кодинг-интервью в Фейсбуке. То есть он будет делиться своим опытом, как он прошел, и еще будет давать советы. И в конце можете сами давать вопросы касаемо работы в Фейсбуке и еще интервью в Фейсбуке. Все, давайте послушаем Муртазу. Если будет нужен перевод, то можно перевести на узбекский или на русский язык.
In case they don't understand, we'll be translating.
Yeah.
Yeah, should we ask first if they need translation or?
Yeah, let's ask if they understand.
So how many people understand me in English?
Oh, we don't need it.
Okay, most people. Some people didn't raise their hand, but this will be recorded.
This will be recorded for us to then edit and put on Facebook, not
Okay.
Facebook, but Instagram. And
We will, put it on Facebook. All right. Should we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Let's
So,
start, guys.
actually, can you also here every now and then just
Yeah,
take
sure.
some videos with my phone? Just like with landscapes. Well, just every like 20 minutes, just take a little clip because I can share these stories. So, thank you so much for having me here. This is my first workshop since the pandemic. So I used to do a workshop maybe every week of this kind. And now, with the pandemic for about 2 years almost, I didn't go anywhere, I didn't do anything. And now I'm back, so I'm really excited, and this is great turnout. We are here in Samarkand. I actually didn't know that there was a community of developers here, so I'll tell you a funny story. I came to Uzbekistan without any plans. I just booked a ticket, and I came here. I didn't know anybody, and I was here for 2 days. I was in Tashkent first, and I was just walking around by myself, and I thought, this is very lonely. I don't know anybody here. And normally, because when I travel with work, I get connected with local contacts we have through our company. But because now I'm traveling by myself, so then I just went on Google and I said, local developers Tashkent. And then I saw there is a Google developer group, GDG, in Tashkent. And then they connected me with GDG in Samarkand. So here I am. And suddenly I feel like in just 1 or 2 days, now I have so many friends in Uzbekistan. But before that, I didn't know anybody. So it's kind of amazing how this community of developers and being interested in technology and coding brings us together and makes us part of the same community, part of the same family. So I'm really excited. And today we have this workshop called Crush Your Coding Interview. I've done this workshop so many times, and it's a workshop that's really helpful for people who are interested in applying for jobs, for how to pass the coding interview and how to learn what are the things to do and don't do in those interviews. So before I talk more about myself, I want to know a little bit about you. How many of you are students right now? Okay. All right. So let's talk about the students. How many of you are first year students? First year, okay. Second year? Third year? How many of you are about to graduate? Okay, a few people. And how many people are currently developers? They're not students, they're working as developers. Just one person, okay. So hopefully, that's good because you're not yet working, so now you will learn how to go through the interviews and you can start working after. So quickly, a little bit about me. My name is Murtada, or I think in local Uzbek you maybe say Murtaza. Yes, Murtaza, yeah. So this is me, it's my name. If you want to connect with me on Facebook or on Instagram, this is my contact information. I would love to hear from you and learn about what you're doing and the things that you're working on in your career. I'm originally from Iraq, from Baghdad, and it's very interesting for me to be here because I'm learning a lot. In Iraq, the culture is also Islamic. I'm learning a lot about Islamic history and culture by being here. And it feels like to me I'm learning more about Islam by being here than by coming from Iraq. So it's been very interesting. I was just went to Bibi Khanum and went to Shahizinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And very interesting history. So, but my journey is that I grew up in Iraq. I lived there most of my life, and then I had a scholarship to study university in Canada. And then while I was studying university, I studied computer engineering, and then I did some internships in the summer while I was studying. I did a few internships at small companies, and then eventually I applied to Facebook. I got an internship at Facebook for 8 months. And at the end of my internship, they said, hey, we like you, we want you to come work for us full time. So once I graduated, I started working at Facebook. And I've been there for now 8 years. So it's been a long time. I'm old now. Okay, so let's talk about this workshop today. This talk is for you. I want you to participate and be engaged with me. I don't want to be talking here the whole time, so don't be shy. Ask me lots of questions. Interrupt me if something is not clear. Just raise your hand or just say something if you don't understand. So before we start, any questions?
No, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this talk.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited. So let's get to it. We think about the interview process, and here we're talking about how to prepare for the interview process. So when you think about how to prepare, there are 3 things that are important. One is understanding the process, and we'll talk a little bit about the interview process, how it works. Second, understanding the material and what we expect you to know and what we ask you in the interview. And last is understanding how to communicate. And that's very important. You see, it's like 1/3 of the importance of this thing is communication. We will talk a lot about communication today. And it's probably more than half of the interview process is being a strong communicator. And a lot of the times I interview people, they're probably very smart, they probably are very capable technically, they can solve problems, but they can't communicate about it, and that could be a big problem. And because of poor communication, you may not pass the interview. So very important to focus on communication. And very important underneath all of this is the way to get comfortable and to get good at interviews is to practice. Practicing a lot with your friends, with your brothers, with your GDG members. So practice is very important. So let's talk about quickly the steps to getting a job offer. So why do people go to interviews? Because they want to get a job. And to get a job offer, you have to do a few things. So first thing is writing a good resume and then getting an interview. After that, you do well in the interview. And we will share a little bit of what happens after the interview as well and how to communicate and interact with the people after the interview. So let's talk about resume quickly. So what do you put on your resume? Why do we have resumes even? What's the point of it? The goal of a resume really is to tell your story. And we want to hear about your past experiences, things you've worked on, any impact you've created as a result of the things you've done in the past. Also talking about your passions. So we want the resume to show things you're passionate about. If you're passionate about virtual reality, if you're passionate about artificial intelligence, make sure your passions are clearly stated in your resume through the projects that you've done. Now, it's important in the resume to highlight your accomplishments. So what did you accomplish in the projects or in the job that you had? But also remember to be genuine. Don't exaggerate or don't make things up, because you will be sometimes asked to discuss things from your resume. So important to be genuine about it. Now, things to include on your resume. So first is just some basic information about you. Your name, where you went to school, include the degree or the university you studied, and also your GPA or your average, your grades. So this will help people see where your performance is. You don't need to include your information about how many kids you have, or even putting a picture of you. I see sometimes resume people have if they're married or they're single or other things. It's not really important. But also remember, resumes depending on the culture, so they could be different. Like sometimes I see people put their religion on their resume, but it's not important. We don't care about the religion when we're doing the job. So more about your past, your experiences, your university. Also talking about projects. So this is really where you show your skills and your strengths when you describe the projects you've worked on. So it could be industry experience that you've done, internships, jobs. If you've worked in a startup, include all of that in your resume. If you don't have any job experience, then you can include interesting class projects that you've done. So if you're still a student, most of you are still students, then talk about things you've done in the classroom. But pick the ones that are interesting and that are challenging. Don't say that you made a Hello World program. That's not interesting, right? But if there's any courses you took that were challenging. If you have any blogs or GitHub accounts, include them on your resume too. That's a good way to show your activity and your contribution. And if you took any relevant courses, so like if you're interested in VR, then including some courses that you took maybe about VR or artificial intelligence or anything like that. Now again, don't include your introduction to programming course. Everybody took that, it's not very interesting. But if you took something special, something advanced, then mentioning that as well. Okay, let's talk about how to get an interview. Now you have a good resume, then you want to get an interview. So different ways you can get an interview is you can get a referral from a current employee. So if you know anybody in any of the companies that you're interested in working at, including Facebook, Google, any of them, if you talk to them, say, hey, can you give me a referral? Now, of course, they need to know you and they need to know your skills because I have an option now as an employee of Facebook to refer anybody that I think will be a good employee at Facebook. And actually, I get money if I refer somebody who gets the job because the company wants us to bring more skilled and talented engineers. So it's a good reason for me to refer somebody that will become an engineer or employee at Facebook. So getting a referral is usually a good way to get an interview. Attending a talk like this one, this is a good opportunity to connect with people in the community, to network. Now you meet each other. Maybe some of the people here are hiring. You can get a referral or interview from them. Maybe people who come with me sometimes, we have other recruiters who attend these events and say, hey, give me a resume, I'll take a look at it, maybe give you an interview. Participating in hackathons or coding competitions. I know GDG Samarkand has arranged, 6 hackathons already? Yeah. So
Not really.
I like
Three. Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
In Tashkent, yeah, they had a lot of hackathons.
okay. So use the hackathons and the competitions that happen in your local community. That's a great way. First of all, you can put it on your resume, you can learn things, you can meet people, you can network, and maybe you get a referral to a job interview from it too. Presenting in a conference or a seminar, if you have something that you're passionate about, something that you understand really well and you want to share it with people, make a presentation or training about it. Also helps you stand out and people will know your name. Writing a blog too, if you learned a new technology or a new framework, like hey, I'm a React developer, today I learned about using React hooks with this and this and that. You can write a blog about it. People, when they Google, they maybe see your blog and they say, hey, I like your blog. Do you want to come for an interview, get a job with us? So, and then finally, you can submit your resume online. This is probably the easiest step, but of course, probably millions of people submit their resume through these online systems. So in order to be distinguished and to stand out, you probably want to do these other things that I mentioned before. Okay, questions about this?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what do you expect from a person to refer him or her? Like most people ask for lead code profile to see how many problems he or her has solved. What do you?
So usually I refer people I know. Because if I don't know them, then it's hard for me to give a meaningful referral. Or if somebody, if I get, for example, I come to a hackathon and I mentor somebody in the hackathon and I say, hey, this person was really strong in the hackathon, then I will make a referral to them. But I probably wouldn't just refer somebody I've never worked with or never met. It would, or sometimes when I come to these workshops and I ask questions and I see people like somebody is like really good solving, like, because now in a little bit we'll actually solve some problems together. So there are sometimes when some people from the audience, they solve the problems even better than me. And I say, hey, give me your email, I'll talk to you some more. So, it just depends. Everybody does their own thing. The referral does not guarantee you a job. You still have to pass the interview. It simply just says, hey, this person, we know a little bit about them, they're strong, let's see in the interview how they do. So you still have to demonstrate your skills in the interview. but the referral helps you get that first step. Good question though. Other questions? All right, so let's move on and talk about how to do well in the interview. This is the most important part probably of this session. So let's get into it. So before we start how to do well in the interview, let's talk about the goals of the interview. Why do we actually do coding interviews? What's the point of it? Really, we want to get a sense of how you think and tackle hard problems. At a company like Facebook, or just about every company in the world really, you're solving hard problems. If the problems were not hard, then there's no point in solving them. So you need to use some problem-solving skills every day at your job to solve the problems that you're facing. So at the interview, we want to see, okay, how do you solve problems? So we will give you a problem and we want to see how you handle it. We want to see how you think of engineering trade-offs. So when you're deciding between memory and space or time, how do you decide, here I will make my program slower to save memory, or here I will make you use memory to be faster. These trade-offs, these decisions that you make, how do you think about them and how do you justify them? How you communicate about your technical problems and your solutions. So remember here, communication shows up again. And I said at the beginning, it's a big part of the interview is being able to communicate, because really when you come and you work in any of these software positions, you're working in a team and you're constantly communicating with your colleagues about your solutions, your ideas. So being able to communicate and discuss is very important. And part of communication also is listening, not just talking, right? So remember that in the interview, you have to listen and pay attention to the interviewer and what they're saying too. Because in the job too, when you're doing your job, you have to listen to your colleagues and hear their ideas as well. Also, we want to see the limits of what you know. Everybody has limits to their knowledge. Nobody knows everything, and that's okay. So sometimes in the interview, we push the boundaries to see like, all right, when do you stop knowing the answer? At which point will you not know the answer to a problem, or will you not be able to solve a problem? So that means sometimes it's okay. Don't feel bad if you don't know the answer to something, because it may just be that the interviewer is pushing the boundaries to see the limits. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Okay, let's talk about the material. Remember I said understanding the process is part of it, is also understanding the material. And what do we cover in a coding interview? So a lot of people, when they are coming to do a coding interview with companies like Facebook, Google, or other big companies, they try to solve puzzles, and that's how they prepare for an interview. But really, we don't ask you puzzle questions. Instead, we focus on problems that relate to data structures and algorithms. And those are, you mentioned here LeetCode. A lot of these problems will be available on LeetCode, HackRank, Caddis is another platform. What is it called? Codeforces, Code Wars. A lot of platforms offer these, or Geeks to Geeks. A lot of places have these kind of data structures and algorithms problems. So that's where you want to practice, not puzzles. So let's talk about the things that we cover. As I said, data structures and algorithms is the primary thing. We are interested in seeing how you understand problems, not how you memorize. So don't think that you have to memorize the solution to merge sort or the solution to quick sort. These are algorithms that have been well understood and well researched, and we don't want you to come to the interview and just reproduce a memorized solution. Instead, we want to see how you understand these principles and these fundamentals of computer science and how you apply them to solving a new problem. Most likely the problem in the interview will be something that's a little bit different or new to you, so it's not going to be like implement a queue or a stack. It's more going to be using probably stacks and queues and binary search and sorting and merging and all these things to solve something. It's important to be able to discuss the complexity of your code. So anything you write, you need to say the complexity of this is O of n squared or whatever. Does everybody understand complexity? Yeah, people understand it? So there are a lot of people who don't raise their hands about complexity. This is very important to learn this topic. So if maybe you haven't studied it yet, or do they teach it in college here? Yeah, the big O notation and complexity analysis. So maybe some people haven't reached that course yet, but if you already graduated, or if you're gonna go to an interview and you don't know complexity analysis or big O notation, it's very important to learn it. So go take a course on it. You can learn it in probably 2 days. It's not that difficult, but it's important to know how to analyze your code and describe the complexity of it in visual notation for both the space and the time complexity. Now, it's okay to use common library functions. Like I said, we're not trying to get you to implement sort or search every time that you need to use it. So just invoke the library function. If your solution requires a sorting algorithm to use a sorting function, just use like array.sort or whatever is available to you in the language. But make sure you understand what's happening behind the scene and what's the complexity of that and what it's doing, but you don't need to implement it from scratch. And I said this already, it's unlikely to be asked to implement basic algorithms because this has been done a long time ago and they've been solved. We don't need to solve them again. We also avoid specific questions about concepts. So we're unlikely to ask you things in the interview like, tell me how you implement something in React version 7. Like that's a very specific thing, and most people maybe don't know React version 7 or what does version 7 do. So we avoid those. That's why we focus on the data structures and algorithms, because those are generic and abstract, and they can be solved by just about every programming language. So we only ask specific questions if you are an expert in that domain. If we're looking for React engineers, or if we're looking for iOS engineers, then we will ask iOS questions. But otherwise, we wouldn't. And this is very important, the last part. Use your most comfortable language. People say, oh, well, which language should I use? The one you're most comfortable with. You don't need to push yourself and corner yourself into using PHP because you learned that Facebook uses PHP. You know, like, don't worry about it. I started working at Facebook and I never wrote any PHP before the job. We expect that you can learn the language on the job. In like 3-4 days, you can be set up and start coding in it. So use the language you're most comfortable with. This will make sure that you don't stumble on syntax and semantics and like forgetting to put a semicolon or putting a semicolon when you don't need one. I had somebody come and write Python code and he was putting semicolons at every line. Like, no, you don't put like, it's obvious that when you start putting semicolons in your Python code, it's obvious that you don't know Python. You haven't been writing Python. So if you make these mistakes, the interviewer will say, what's going on? Like, why are you doing this? Are you inexperienced with coding? Or are you inexperienced with this one particular language? And you don't want to confuse the interviewer that way. So just use the one you're most comfortable with. Any questions about this?
I have a question. So,
Yes.
what kind of language you're using when you're applying for Facebook?
What kind of language?
Yeah.
So like I said, you can use which one did I use?
Yeah.
Oh man, that was 9 years ago. So I think maybe Java I used, or C++.
Oh.
I can't remember. Yeah, this is a good point too, actually. Sometimes it's good to avoid using things like C++ or these languages that require you to write a lot of things to do something simple, you know? You end up wasting time, especially if you're writing by hand, then you have to write public, private, function, void, whatever, main, this and this, and like just putting all that stuff, forget it. Just write it in Python or write it in JavaScript, if you know how to do it. But if you're comfortable with these languages that have more overhead and more, they're more verbose, right? Like if you want to do something simple in C++, it just takes many more lines of code than if you do it in like Python or JavaScript. So it's not to say you must, but just a suggestion that if you're equally comfortable between these two languages, pick one that is easier to code in and doesn't require a lot of typing and a lot of overhead. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other questions about this?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, how can you get better at problem solving? You know, when you're struggling.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And actually, I think about this a lot too, because I say the most important skill, or one of the most important skill in interviews is problem solving. And actually not just interviews, in just any job in the world, like not even coding. Like we're talking about coding interviews and programming. But you know, I was talking to my friend, and he's a doctor, and I said, hey, why did you want to be a doctor? And he said, you know, it's just, I really enjoy solving problems. And I said, wait a minute, you're a doctor, what problems are you solving? I'm a programmer, I solve problems. You're a doctor, And he's like, no, I see somebody and their foot is broken, and I have to say, how do I fix their foot? And I have to see their bones and this and that, put it together. And and then you talk to lawyers, and you talk to accountants, and you talk to just about everybody, and they're solving problems. So problem solving is really a universal skill that is needed in every job. Now, how do you increase your problem solving? That's the $1 million question, man. I don't have particular answers. I went on Google the other day and said, how do you become a better problem solver? And there are people who've written blog posts and people who've made courses about it. I think one of the things, or two things that I know for sure help, is one, practicing. It's just, you get better at solving certain types of problems by practicing them a lot and putting yourself in positions where you have to solve a problem. So, if we think about life too, like, I was standing on the side of the street trying to get a taxi here, and I was running late, and there was no taxi, and I had to figure out, download the app, and I had to use internet from somebody, and it didn't work, and then I called here to see, like, hey, can you help me? This is kind of a problem, and I had to figure out how to come here. Maybe a simple one, but really, even in life, we face problems regularly, and so practice, I think, one is good, and the other one, I think, is asking questions. And you learn to be a better problem solver by asking more questions about the problem to understand it better. Sometimes you ask yourself questions too. And sometimes you have to ask others who may know more about the problem to help you arrive at a solution. We'll talk a little bit about this in a second. Other things too, maybe, is people will say, like, breaking down the problem and trying to solve it into smaller chunks. Instead of, you see one big ambiguous problem, it's really hard. But if you break it down and you make it smaller and smaller, it becomes easier. And I mean, that's, if you guys remember merge sort or these recursive algorithms, that's what they do, right? They take a big array of something, they break it down, and they perform operations on it, and then they put it together. So it's also used in computer science. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Я плохо английский знаю, переведу. Насколько сложно работать в Фейсбуке?
How hard is it to work on Facebook?
Yeah, it depends on how you define hard. I would say it's not an easy job for sure. And like I said, if it was easy, it would be boring. So it's challenging, and by being challenging, you learn from it, you grow. You're constantly being pushed and challenged to learn new things and to experience, to have new experiences. So for me, it's hard enough, as in it's the right amount of hard, so I can always learn from it. If it was easier, I would probably not like it. If it was maybe harder, it would be maybe too hard to do. So for maybe other people, they would say, this is too easy, I want something harder, and they go, they make their own company, and maybe that's harder to do. Or for some people, they say, no, it's too hard, I don't want to do this, I want to find an easier job. So it depends, I think, on personal preference and what your tolerance is for hard.
May I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
Can you bring some examples of problems that you solve every
Yes.
day at your work?
We're going to do that in 2 slides.
Okay.
Yes. Or problems at work or in the interview? At work. Yeah, so it's harder to talk about this because problems we solve at work are they require a lot of context around the project, and to explain it, you have to really learn about the project and the bigger thing, and like it would take more time to describe it. In kind of abstract terms, like Facebook deals with scalability. It's a company that is serving billions of users, and there are trillions of things happening on the platform, every hour, every maybe minute. And so managing that level of scalability is one of the hard problems.
High load.
What's that?
High load.
Yeah, the high load and being able to create systems that work in that with that kind of traffic. In some of what I do, we're working on projects to bring internet. I think you mentioned at the beginning,
Yes.
the internet.org. Yeah. So to bring internet to places in the world that are not yet connected is also a very complex problem, and there are multiple layers of complexity to this problem and how to solve it. So sometimes the solutions are not always technical, and they might involve programs created or relationships, partnerships, or regulatory changes, or sometimes you have to go around the problem in a longer way to solve it because the direct path is harder maybe. So, it all depends on the project and the context we're working with. Yeah, we'll take one last question and then I'll keep going with it.
Like regarding you working on a problem with several layers as internet developer, are you always involved on each one of them, or they divide that to certain groups, or just?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the project I mentioned, internet.org, is a very complex project. We have hundreds of people working on it, and of course everybody has their part of it and their responsibility. There are teams that are focused on marketing and legal, and people that are focused on coding or technical solutions, people focused on partnerships, people focused on relationships with governments and regulations. And so we have hundreds of people involved in this project, and everybody does something different. And I don't have to be involved in every step of it because it's not one person can be. It's impossible for one person to be involved or aware of all of it. So that's why we have so many people working on it.
I say, do they share what's going on any other department that you are not working? Do they share it, or it's like secret something?
There are almost no secrets inside the company. Facebook is one of the places that are really good at this. There's transparency going up and down, so people at the bottom know about things at the top, and people at the top know things at the bottom, and it's just very open. So I can go and join the discussions of any group that is doing, even if they're outside my expertise, if I want to learn updates about it, if I want to learn what they're doing. So yeah, they have that openness. It's really good.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, let's keep going. I have some problems that we can do together. So just a few things before we switch to problem solving. So let's talk quickly about the format of a coding interview. So the first part is an introduction. It's like a couple minutes long. You just say, hey, you introduce yourself, the interviewer introduces themselves. Usually it's just used as an icebreaker, an opportunity to just kind of put you at ease, put the candidates at ease and make them relax before starting the coding part, which is going to be about the majority of the interview will be spent on solving one or two coding problems. So the total interview time is about 45 minutes. I said, the intro will be like 2 to 3 minutes. Coding will be about 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, depending. And sometimes the interviewer may stop you in the middle of the question and move on. Don't worry, that's okay. Could be different reasons to do this. One is maybe they see this problem is too easy for you. You've already solved it, or you already know the solution is too easy. So remember, we want to see how you solve hard problems. So if the problem is too easy, then we want to give you something harder, see how you do it. Or maybe you're just so stuck, you're not making any progress, and we want to see, hey, let's change the problem, see how things go. Sometimes they just get stuck trying to solve something, and if you change it, you actually learn more about them. Sometimes there are follow-up components depending on how your solution is implemented. So you might be asked to improve it, to make it better, make it run faster, make it use less memory, make the code less complex, or make it cleaner. So there's usually follow-up once you complete your solution. This is very important. Be prepared to test your code. A lot of people forget this step, and they see, they come, they write their solution, and then they say, all right, I'm done. But you gotta test the code. This is an important part of software development, is testing. And if you don't do this, it will seem like you don't have a lot of coding experience. So remember to test your code and analyze its performance. If you're doing a phone interview, you'll use a collaborative tool, an online tool. So you'll write the code on your keyboard. In person, you'll write the code on a whiteboard. But even in both cases, you can't execute the code. So whether you're writing on the whiteboard or whether you're typing it on a computer, we test the code manually, step by step, just by going through it by hand and pretending to be the computer and solving it like you are the computer. We don't actually hit execute and see what happens. And then at the end of the interview, there are a few minutes left for questions, this is your time to talk to the interviewer and maybe ask them about the company and learn about the job and so on. Okay, last slide before we switch to solving some problems. So this is maybe the most important slide. So what are the steps, what are the things you need to do to complete, to have a successful interview? So, you come to the interview and you hear the interviewer give you the problem and say, oh, I want you to write me a program that does this and this and this. And most people, they're excited, nervous, they want to solve it, they want to get through with it. So as soon as they hear the question, they start writing the code, solving it. Actually, you don't want to do that. The first thing you want to do is repeat the question. It sounds silly or unimportant, but it's actually crucial. Just say the question back to the interviewer, using your own words and your own understanding. And this does a few things. One, it makes sure that you and the interviewer understand and agree what problem you're solving. I've interviewed so many people, they skip this step, they start solving the problem, and then 10 minutes later, I realized, wait a minute, this is not what I wanted you to solve. And then we say, okay, we have to start over, explain the question again, and then we just wasted 10, 15 minutes. So you can save yourself a lot of time. This will take 30 seconds to do, and it could help you with the interview. In fact, some interviewers will pay close attention to whether you repeat the question or not, and they will even write it down in their notes as a way to say, this is part of the communication skills. Remember, when you are working with somebody else, verifying you have the same understanding is important. Now, the second thing you do after you repeat the question is actually ask questions about it. So now, most of the time, the question is formulated in a way that is not sufficient to be able to solve it completely. So, yeah, that would be great, actually. It's getting thirsty. So you want to ask questions about edge cases, about understanding, like, what do I do if this happens? Or what if the array has all zeros? Or can the array be so big that I need to divide it up and store it on disk? And what happens if I have a division by zero? Or just all kinds of edge cases or special scenarios that you might need to worry about. Or if there are any assumptions you're making, make sure you state them too. So if you're assuming the array is already sorted, when you get it, make sure you say that, because it may not be true that it's sorted. Or at least ask, hey, is this array sorted before I start working on it, or do I have to do that? Because it could drastically change your solution, right, if something is sorted or not. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay, and then third step is take your time to think about a solution. Don't start coding yet. Just think about something to, like, use the whiteboard maybe to draw a solution, or if you're working on your laptop, use a notepad. Just draw a solution in your mind on paper. Just come up with something before you code it. Make sure it kind of works, and discuss it with your interviewer. Like, I'm thinking that I could do this. Well, I know that this could work, or maybe this, but maybe this is too complex, or it's too slow, or going to take too much memory. But so just discussing it first before writing any code.
Will they give you any tips, like if you ask questions?
Sometimes the interviewer might give you a hint if you ask. So you can ask for hints sometimes, but don't do it so much that you're basically making the interviewer solve the problem for you. So it's okay to sometimes ask if you get stuck, but use it sparingly. So then now remember, we're in a coding interview, and we've done 3 things, and we haven't even started coding yet. Then we start coding. And the fourth step is we say, all right, I think I have a decent understanding of this problem. I asked all the questions, stated my assumptions. I explained an approach that I think would work. Now let me try to start coding it. So now, the whole time you're coding, you have to explain your code. Every line of code you're writing, this for loop, this if statement, this while loop, this whatever, you're going to say and narrate that to the interviewer. You don't have to write comments in your code. That just takes time. It's a waste of time. Don't do it. But just explain as you're writing the code.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it okay to start with a brute force solution, then come up with more optimal one?
Yeah, very good question. Sometimes it is okay. So depending on the problem, the brute force solution may be too trivial, and like it's too simple that you should always, for that kind of problem, you should skip it and do something a little bit better. But for some problems, yes, the brute force could be acceptable as a starting point.
And then change it to 0.
And then change it to make it better, yeah. And actually, it's a recommended strategy to think, don't try to come up with the fanciest solution from the beginning. Try to come up with something simple, maybe brute force, and then improve it. But again, you have to use your judgment because the brute force might be very trivial and it's too obvious, too simple, doesn't have anything interesting about it that you shouldn't even bother with it. So we'll look at some examples and see how that plays out. And finally, after you run your code, run through your code with some test cases. Remember, testing is a crucial part of the interview. You're almost guaranteed that if you don't test your code and the interview ends without you testing your code, you're almost guaranteed that you will not pass the interview, even if your code works, because testing is an important component of the interview. Don't wait for the interviewer to ask you to test your code. Make sure you do it yourself and do it thoroughly. So when you test, step through your code line by line with some test cases. Try to use some edge cases as well to make sure your code validates. Think of like, what is going to make my code have a null pointer exception, or what is going to create a division by 0? Think about those weird situations as well when you test your code, so you can cover all of those things. Almost every time, somebody will have a bug in their code when they test it, and that's okay. You can fix it while testing it. That's why we have testing. Every software engineer, every programmer will have bugs. We test it, we make it better. That's why we have manual testing, we have automated testing, and in the interview too, it's okay to have these bugs and fix them. You have a question?
So shall we add all exceptions to our code?
Should you add what?
Shall we add all exceptions, like if user divide by 0 or input the char instead of maybe int?
Yeah, so this becomes part of you almost enter into a contract with your interviewer. When your interviewer says, I'm going to give you an array of integers, return to me the square root of all the numbers in that array. So now, what is a situation you're going to ask about that array?
What if the integers are negative?
Exactly. So that's a problem, right? If the integers are negative, then what do I do? Because now you know square root of a negative number is a problem. So you enter in a contract with the interviewer. If the interviewer tells you, no, the array is guaranteed that it will never have a negative integer, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't need to handle exceptions, you don't need to have special code for it. But if the interviewer says, I don't know, maybe you will have negatives, we don't know for sure, then you have to come up, okay, so what do I return my results? Do I return 0? Do I throw an exception to the user and I say, can't deal with this? Do I put a null in that entry? So then that's part of the second step I mentioned, is asking questions about the problem, about the input set. Before starting coding, yeah. Can I have negatives if I'm dealing with square roots? If I'm trying to find something that ends up dividing, will I end up having a situation where I divide by 0? So this is where you enter that contract with the interviewer during the second step, and you clarify those assumptions or questions. All right.
I have a question.
Yes, well, 1 second. So let me just get to the last part. And the last part of this is you iterate. So most of the time you solve the problem and then you will make it better. Your first solution a lot of the times will not be the most optimal one. So you just spend time say, okay, how can I make it faster? How can I make it use less memory? How can I make the code cleaner? Or if it's perfect, then the interviewer might change the problem for you a little bit to make it a little bit challenging. Say, all right, let's see what happens if now we have negative numbers. What will you do in that case? Or if you have some weird situations introduced to the problem, how will you handle it? So that's when you iterate and potentially expand the scope of the problem a little bit too. Yeah, you have somebody have a question?
Would there be any time limit for solving one problem?
Yeah, so like I said, the whole interview time is about 45 minutes. So it depends on the interviewer. Some interviewers will say 45 minutes, they'll just do one problem that is like a hard problem, or one problem that has multiple steps where they just kind of make it a little bit harder every time. Or they might say, we'll do 2 problems. One is easy, just kind of a warm-up. It helps you feel more confident, helps you just feel a little bit better. And then a second one that's like medium. So it depends on the interviewer and what they're doing.
So something about half an hour for 1 or 2 problems.
Well, yeah, so the coding time is about 35 to 40 minutes. So if you're going to do 2 problems, then it will be maybe like the first problem, the easy one will be like 10, 15 minutes. and the other problem will be like 20, 25 minutes.
And after the time is out, I will be given the notice that the time is out. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually no. Like if your interview starts at 1 o'clock, it will end at 1:45. So you know when
I
the
have to like adapt to this time.
Yeah, you will be told up front how long the interview will be. So this is another important skill in the interview process is time management. You have to really be careful of the time. As you can see, it's not a lot of time. So you have to solve these problems fast. So that's why practicing will help you prepare and be more comfortable. And when you practice, you want to watch the time too. Like, hey, this is a problem I should solve in 10 minutes. This is a problem I should solve in 20 minutes. So being able to allocate your time is also important. Yes?
I heard sometimes there are multiple interviews, right? Like
Most times there are multiple interviews, yes.
So how many can you expect? Like,
So it depends on the position and depends on the process. For internships, there's 2 interviews usually. And they're the same interview, just different interview or different questions, just to have 2 different opinions. For full-time positions, usually it's 4 to 5 interviews, and they have different types of interviews. So one of them, or 2 of them will be coding interviews, one of them could be behavioral, and one of them could be design or system design. So here we're just talking about coding. The other interviews will also be like 45 to 60 minutes long, and they have their own situation. So we're not talking about those right now, we're just talking about coding.
so are there any aptitude tests like during the interview or other
Any what's it?
aptitude tests?
Like standardized test or
Yeah. Any sort of like,
multiple choice questions?
yeah.
No, we don't do those, but we do, like I said, we do a behavioral, we do
No,
a,
I mean, have you heard about aptitude tests where they test you like,
IQ.
IQ type of questions?
No, we don't do that.
psychological?
Some companies do that.
yeah. No, we don't do those. Yeah. And again, I'm telling you about the interview process from the perspective of Facebook. So keep in mind, other companies might do differently, but Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Uber, a lot of them follow more or less a similar process. Maybe slightly different, but similar. But other companies, like especially smaller companies or startups, they may do it totally differently. And they say, we're going to give you a problem, take it home and come back next week and show us your solution. So I've heard about that, and I think it's an interesting way to do interviews. Potentially, you can demonstrate your skills a little bit better. With big companies like Facebook and Google, there is no capacity to do these kind of interviews. These interviews are very demanding. But smaller companies, they have maybe less applicants, so they may have the time to do that. Okay. All right.
How difficult the interviewing programs for internship or junior developers?
So it's actually similar difficulty. We don't really fluctuate the difficulty very much between internships, junior, and even senior for coding. So we ask relatively similar difficulty for all of these positions from the perspective of coding. Yes.
Question. So, how many coding tests we have to expect when we are going to apply for a Facebook?
So as far as I know, there are no coding tests. There are just these coding interviews that we're talking about. And like I said, for internships, usually there are 2 coding interviews, and for full-time, there could be 4 to 5 interviews. Yeah.
Do you have some examples of programming interviews or system design?
System designs, I don't have experience with it. But for this coding, actually, we're gonna do one right now. This is an example of a problem. Let's do this together. So here's the problem. Let's give it an array in which every number is between 1 and n. Determine if there are any duplicates. So what is the first thing you do when you do this problem?
That's a question.
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question, then ask the question.
Yeah, exactly. So you're going to repeat the question. So you'll say, okay, just to make sure I understand, you want me to write an algorithm to determine if an array has any duplicates? And you say, yeah, that's correct. So now, okay. If you're going to ask questions about it, what questions would you ask?
If there are any, what should I return, like true or false? So
Exactly.
Number of duplicates or what?
Very good question. Yeah, actually, what are we doing? Are we just trying to find if there's a single duplicate and return true or false right away? Or do we want to count the number of duplicates? Do we want to return the position of the duplicate? Do we want to remove the duplicate? Like, what do we want to do? What are we doing? So that's a good question. What else?
Want to return type?
Yeah, let's say in this case you'll return true or false.
I have a question. What if can numbers be
What type of
more
video
than 2 times? Like
Yeah. Can they repeat more than twice? Yeah, very good question too.
What if the array is empty?
What if the array is empty? Yeah, what do I return? And in this case, you can say it's the empty array has no duplicate, so you can return false safely. But good question too, good edge case. Yeah, what you had something?
Can we ask questions regarding the time and memory before the code?
Yeah, so
Is there different
You-
sorting algorithms?
you can ask questions. Most of the time, the interviewer will say, "Do your best." So you say, "Hey, how much time can I use? How much memory can I use?" And it'll be,
Will the array be sorted?
yeah, very good. Is the array going to be sorted?
Out of the array.
Yeah, is it sorted already or not? Because that can drastically change how you solve this problem.
so, can we go to the solution?
Yeah, I want to hear more. Do people have other questions?
So here, like, is given an array, but you don't know if it's 1, 2, 3 to n. It's just some array, right? There
Well, it
could
says-
be duplicates inside it.
The original question says every number is between 1 and n.
So can you assume it's increasing from 1 to n, or is there like?
Yeah, it's not guaranteed to be. So it could be n could be 100, and you could just have 2 elements in the array. Or actually, it says, I guess it's saying 1 and n, meaning n is the number of elements in the array. So if the array has 3 elements, then the numbers will be between 1 and 3. That's all we know. We don't have anything about whether they're sorted or not. Okay, so let's look at some questions that you may ask. So one important question is, can I destroy or modify the array? So that might also impact the way you solve this problem. You'll see how in a second. And if you assume one way or another, that's bad, because maybe you assume you can modify it, and then you go and you write the code that modifies the array, but then the interviewer says, no, this is a read-only array. I didn't say you can modify it. And then you have to start over. So, or if you assume you cannot modify it, but actually you could, maybe there's an easier solution you could have used that requires modifying the array. So that's a question. Here in this case, we'll say you cannot modify or destroy the array. So you have the array is read-only. Can I use additional space? And again, you ask this question, and a lot of the times the interviewer will say, use your best, do your best. Only use additional space if you actually have to. So always you're going to try to solve it in constant space or no extra space. In this case, we'll say, no, you can't use additional space. You have to solve it in constant space. Will the array ever be empty? So you ask this question, well, what if it's empty? Maybe it's empty, and maybe it doesn't matter for your solution, but if you're going to assume the array has elements and you start like index 0 already, you start reading it right away, then it could be a problem. So you have to check if it's empty if your code assumes otherwise. Are they all integers? And maybe it doesn't really matter here, but or it could maybe matter. So, but here we'll say they're all integers. Okay. So now we asked the question, we understood the problem a little bit better. We said you can't modify the array, and you cannot use additional space. So we're being very restrictive with this problem. So now what do you do next?
Like by using additional space, can we like create new variables? Temporary.
So you can create individual variables, like variables that just have a single unit of memory.
Just store.
Yeah, but you cannot use,
Arrays,
you cannot
objects.
create an array or a dictionary or but basically you cannot create objects that have a size equivalent to the size of the array. So you understand how like complexity works when basically if your array has 1 million elements and you need to create something that stores 1 million elements, then you use O of n space. Because that means if your array has 1 billion elements, then you will need 1 billion elements created as well. But if you're only going to create 5 variables are fine. If there are 5 integers, that's just 5 variables. They will always be 5, whether you have 1 million elements or 1 trillion elements or whatever. So that's how you tell. That's what additional space means. Okay. So now we said the next thing you do is like, all right, let's take the time to think about this problem. So how would you do it? What do you think?
Array is sorted.
We said no, it's not sorted.
It's not sorted.
Yeah.
And we cannot use any dictionary in array.
You can't use additional space. You can't modify it.
One of the easiest way.
And just compare
What?
it with all the.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
We can take the first unit and compare it with everything.
Okay.
Everything's in the array.
On square.
If we don't worry
But
about
it
the
is
time.
n squared. It's n squared complexity.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult. So
Yeah,
we
so-
can make the march and like разделяй власт. Разделяй власт.
Divide and conquer.
So yeah. So then you say, all right, you know, I can't use additional space. I can't sort the array. It's not sorted. I can't modify it. So the best thing I can do is I just look at every element and I see if that element exists anywhere else in the array.
Bubble sort.
It's kind of like bubble sort, but we're not really sorting. We're just comparing every element with all the elements after it. So we take the first element, compare with the rest. Then take the second element, compare with the rest. Take the third element and compare with the rest. And if we do this, we will have had to compare every element with every element, just about. So then that means we have an n squared complexity. So it's not ideal as a time complexity, but given the constraints we have, this is the best solution we can come up with for now. So we say, all right, let's do this. So we start coding it. Here we're using, I guess this is Java. So we don't have the whole, main and stuff, just the function. So the function is going to return a Boolean, and it takes an integer array, a primitive data type array. And we're going to do two for loops. The first for loop will go from 0 to the end of the array. And the second for loop will go from the current index, the I index of the first for loop, to also the end of the array. And we will constantly compare the I and the j plus 1. J will move, I will be fixed. And then we'll move I again and j will go and so on. And if we ever find 2 elements that are the same, we return true. We don't need to do more about it. Otherwise, if we complete this for loops and don't find number 2 elements that are the same, we return false. We can say there are no duplicates. So we said the complexity of this is n squared. What's the space complexity?
Constant.
It's constant space because we're not using additional space. So this is a good starting point. But then we say, all right, can we make this better? Can we improve it? So before we talk about improving it, there's actually a bug in this code. You see it?
Return true.
No, if we have empty array,
What happens if we have empty array?
j plus I.
The out of range j plus 1 is an issue. Because if it goes to the end of the
Only
array,
one.
then it's going to crash.
Yeah, so this code will have a out of bound exception. I think in Java it's called out of bound exception or null pointer exception. And because j plus 1 is going to try to go out of bound, when we reach the end, when j in the second loop, j will go from 0 or I until length minus 1. That's the last value of j. So if the array has 4 elements, then j will become 3 in the last iteration. And then here we're doing a sub j plus 1, which means give me the 4th element, or the element at index 4 in an array that has only elements 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's out of bounds. So we need to fix that. So we fix this. Now we say let's relax one of the constraints of this problem, and we'll say it's okay to modify the array. So if okay to modify the array, is it possible for us to improve the solution?
We can solve.
Which is
Using set.
depends on value.
Using set?
Yes.
No, set will require additional space. So we're saying no additional space, but okay to modify.
Appends the value temporarily at the end of it.
What will that do?
Just keep some
So we
space.
can make duplicates.
Yeah.
Add some
So yeah, sorting the array actually, what does that do? Why is sorting the array?
Well, if you solve that, the two duplicate elements appear next to each other.
Okay.
It helps us to find them more quickly.
Exactly. So actually, if we sort, then we don't need to search for every element. We don't need to search the whole array to see if it exists again. We can just search neighbors. If two neighbors are the same, that means we have a duplicate. Otherwise, if there are no two things next to each other that are the same, that means there are no duplicates. Because if there were, they would exist next to each other. So we can sort the array. So now before we start, we were sorting it, and then we simply just check every element with its neighbor. So we do I and check I plus 1. Now in this case, we fix this mistake. We make sure I goes to I doesn't get to length minus 1. So the largest value for I will be just length minus 2. And here we can access the last element. If two things next to each other are the same, we return true. Now, what becomes the complexity of this?
On log n.
Yeah. Why is it n log n?
For sorting, you use log n, and for
Yeah.
that one.
Exactly. So sorting, the best sorting algorithms will be n log n. And here again, we're using Java. We can assume like, well, I don't know, Java maybe is using merge sort under the hood or using the heap sort or something to implement. So whatever it is, it's probably n log n at best. And remember, the code, the complexity of the code is determined by the slowest part. So even though this loop is linear, we still have the sorting, which is n log n. That's why I say, you don't need to know exactly how merge sort works, or you don't need to memorize how merge sort exactly works, but you need to have a good understanding of the complexity of the things you involve. So it's okay to use common library functions. Here you see we're not implementing the sorting ourselves, we're just using it from the library function, but we need to know what's the cost of it. So that's n log n. Now, actually, how many people here are Java programmers? Okay, only 2. So people who write Java code, they should notice there's also a problem with this code. It's only specific to Java.
The bug is.
Any ideas? It's only if you know Java code. If you write Java code regularly, you'll see it.
Arrays, sort master, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So a.sort is actually not a valid function because a is a primitive data type. It's not an object. It does not have functions or methods that you can invoke on it. So the way you sort an array of a primitive in JavaScript and in Java is by calling arrays or array.sort, I think, one of them. So this a.sort will give you actually compile time error. It will not compile. So this is to say, know your language. You know, when you code to the language that you're comfortable with. Because if you're, as you see, like you know Java, you will not write something like this if you're a Java programmer. But when you write something like this, then it's like, wait a minute, are you inexperienced in coding or are you inexperienced in Java? And it's confusing. So just better to use a language that you're comfortable with. Okay, so now we'll relax one more constraint. We say it's okay to use additional space. So if we use additional space, can we do better? Right now we're doing n log n. Can we do better than n log n?
Just store the number of the elements, create a dictionary,
Yeah.
and use the elements as a key,
Yeah.
and store their number of
Yeah.
references in the element.
Yeah. So now we can do that, or we don't even really need to store it. Just any element that has already been recorded once. We say if we're about to record it the second time, then we know that's a duplicate. We can return true. So similar approach, same amount of work. So here now we're writing in JavaScript. So we will initialize a dictionary, call it scene, to record all the elements that we've seen so far. And we're going to go through the array. If the element we're currently looking at, now sub I, if it already exists in the dictionary, it means we previously added it. That means now we're seeing it again. So that means it's a duplicate. So return true. Otherwise, if we're seeing it for the first time, just initialize it to be like, hey, we've seen this element, put it here. And then if we complete this for loop without ever seeing anything twice, it means we have no duplicate, return false. So what becomes the complexity of this?
All n.
So this is time or space?
We're using more space, but the time complexity is all n.
So time complexity is O of n. What is the space complexity?
All.
It's also O of n.
All n.
Yeah, so now we're using a dictionary, and this dictionary can be as big as the original array. So that's
Worst case.
in the worst case, yeah. So again, remember, when we say n, means n is the number of elements in the array. So the time complexity being O of n means we will do as many operations as there are elements in this array. And also, we will need to use extra memory that is equivalent to the number of elements in the array, because we're going to create this dictionary, and this dictionary can become as big as the original array. So that's why we say O of n in terms of time and space. Again, if you don't know big O notation, if you don't know what any of this means, go study it. You'll learn it in a short amount of time. It's helpful and important, and it's not too hard. Okay. Any questions about this? How are we doing on time? So it's 6:20.
Regarding the questions like how likely are they going to be repeated during the next interviews? Or the concept will stay the same and
You mean like to get the same question?
yeah.
Well, it's unlikely because we have just so many questions. But if by any chance you get the same question, we ask you to tell the interviewer and then they'll change it. But it's unlikely. Also, we tell each other which questions have been asked already, so we avoid asking the same question. Okay, so let's do one more. Yeah? Yeah?
What's the complexity of this question?
Yeah, good question. Complexity of the question, not the solution, right? So this question is kind of too easy. It will not come in an interview. We're just using it here as a sample and something that, we just to practice and to show you kind of how you can have one question solved in 3 different ways. Like you saw, we solved it with n squared at the beginning when the constraints were really strict. We relaxed one constraint and solved it with n log n. We relaxed another constraint, we solved it in n, but also used additional space. So now, as I mentioned at the beginning, these are the trade-offs you sometimes are making in interviews or in solving problems. Sometimes you decide to make your code run slower because you have more time maybe, but you needed to use less memory. But sometimes you make it run faster because it needs to be on demand, it needs to run fast, but it might mean you need more memory. So that depends on what you're doing. So let's do one more problem. This time I want you guys to try solving it, and then we can solve it together. Do you guys have your laptops or notebooks, or you want to solve it just like in your head?
Whiteboard.
Yeah, I'll solve it on the whiteboard with you. But first I want to hear how you will solve it. So this is a real interview problem I asked. I asked now, but now I don't ask because you all know it. So it's this one is, I said easy and hard. This one, if I am doing 2 questions in my interview, this would be the first question. So this would be like the easier one. I ask it at the beginning, and then after I ask something that's a little bit harder. So do you want to solve it yourself just on pen and paper, or do you want to just like take 2 minutes to think about it and we solve it together? What do people think?
What does non-zero elements mean? Like they are numbers or what?
Yeah, it means they're not a 0.
Are there any like
Everything except 0.
Yeah, so if you have the array, So this is an array where, 1, 3, 0, 5, 7. So we have non-zero, non-zero, 0, non-zero, non-zero.
What about strings?
Are there any letters?
Negative numbers.
Negative numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible to have negative numbers.
Strings, characters.
No, it's always going to be numbers.
Only numbers. Float
Yeah.
numbers as well.
Could be.
Should they be sorted at the end? Like,
No, we don't care. We don't care about sorting them. So we just want, what is it? Move all the non-zero elements to the left. So the way I usually give this problem is to say,
Can we modify the
so there's actually, yeah, you guys are doing this part already, like, asking all the questions about it. So you asked already, does it contain other things besides numbers? It's no, only numbers. Can we use extra memory?
Yes.
Again, try to do it without. What goes on the right side of the elements? Because we're saying move the non-zeros to the left. So like, what do we put on the right side?
zero.
So actually not necessarily. And then you ask also, does the order matter? So this problem, the way I usually give it, I give it and I give an example of it to make it a little bit clearer. So if this was the input, then the output could look something like this. So we moved all the non-zero elements to the left. We don't actually care about what happens on the right side. So you would think it would be the 0 here, but we don't actually care. You could just leave the 7. There used to be a 7 here, so you could just leave the 7 there. We don't care. We just want the number of the non-zero elements moved to the left, and we want to return the number of non-zero elements. So in this case, we return 4. Yeah.
Can we use some functions like pop or add, push?
You can do whatever you want. But then also, what does that do to the complexity of your code when you're popping and pushing questions?
So easy to use pop. Just remove the
Yeah, so how does that affect your solution? So actually, you got some papers and pens, right? You guys want to just do it?
Pen and papers.
If people want to do it and by themselves, just like take a couple minutes to. And I will just take a talking break.
Можешь тоже, да? На пищу, конечно.
Можно еще?
Кому еще?
Кому еще? Что, не получил ты?
Просто нули, надо влево, да?
Не влево, да. И правой стороной.
А что такое?
Не просто
Нет. Один ход и все.
это all English.
Времени.
Like I had a question. Can I ask?
Sure.
Like, should it be in that particular array, or we can create another one and where they are saying like we don't care about the zeros, and if they don't care about the zeros, how about we take those non-zero numbers and store them in another array?
We want to do it in place. So that's another factor. We want to modify the original array. We don't want to create a new array and return it. Because the return of this function should be an integer. You just return how many non-zero elements you found. So in this case, you will return 4.
We just return the count of non-zero elements.
Yes, but also move all the non-zero elements to the left.
We can modify
You can modify it. You have to modify it. You must modify it.
Like we can count number of negative and non-negative integers without moving to the left.
No, we want both. We want you to move and count. I mean, just counting is triple. We want basically just think of this problem as this. You have, for some reason, the zero values are garbage values to you. So you want to put the garbage at the end of the array, and you want to put all the useful elements at the beginning. And you want to know how many useful elements there are. So you will only read the first 4 elements, and you won't read past it. You don't care about the rest of it. That's basically the idea of the problem.
Нет, без разницы. Без разницы, сколько мы говорим. Просто мы его модифицируем.
Можем это увеличить
Что нам я Я на идею похож.
Вдохновение.
Вы можете известный человек.
Но у меня идеи есть, только... Нет, я реально говорю.
На PHP это получится?
Да.
На PHP без цикла.
Да?
А не.
Это за сценой, да? Все равно будет цикл. За сценой.
Можешь какая-то функция.
Какая функция все равно. Без цикла может быть там функция есть. Array wall и другие функции. Как это без цикла?
Ну, сейчас, что я сначала...
Уволюсь с работы, если без цикла получится.
Он другой. Когда мы взглянули на от Space. Да, способ bubble сорта более эффективный. Но на он кажется,
То есть программа есть.
All right. How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing? What's that? Without any loop? Somebody's talking on the phone, somebody's talking to their friend. Like, what's going on, guys? Okay, you wanna talk about this?
Is there any information about how many zeros
Could be no zeros.
they could be sources?
It could be all zeros, it could be no zeros.
You said that you can modify the array. Twice.
You cannot solve the problem.
Yeah, you have to modify this. Yeah. I mean, you could copy it if you want and then write back to the original array, but that's using extra memory. Yeah.
Or maybe read.
You want to explain your idea? Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. I'm just sorting the array and checking. I just
You're
created
sorting the
new-
array?
I'm creating the new integer
Okay.
j, and it's equal to 0, and then I'm just checking each element in this array, and if it's 0, I just assign it with, I just swap it with the j position in this array, and then j plus plus.
Okay.
And something we use.
And keep count. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
you should add something to keep count of.
I wrote it in C++ and this is without the swap function. I didn't use this one.
okay. I think I understand the idea. So that one is a good idea. So basically you will move through the array. It's almost like you have a slow index and a fast index.
Yes, yes.
And like you will have a slow index that you only move when you find a non-zero. And if you find a 0, you don't move the slow index.
Yes, yes.
And then the fast index will move all the time.
And just swap.
Yeah, that one. So that one works. And that's usually most people come up with the solution. There is a slightly more optimal solution to do.
So we just got 2 solutions now.
Yeah.
He says that we can use the sorting. And
If you're doing sorting, it's already not a good idea.
yeah. Just basically we're like on login thing, you know.
Yeah, like this problem should be solved in linear time.
Linear.
Yeah, because if you think about it, this problem is a sub-problem of sorting. When you're sorting, you need to sort everything, make sure everything is in the right order. But here, we just need to put elements in 2 groups, non-zeros and zeros. So with sorting, you have to compare in the order and make sure everything is going in a descending or ascending order. So this problem is simpler than sorting. So if you're using n log n, then maybe you're going too complicated. Sometimes people try to solve it in n squared, and that's already like, no, that's bad. Like sorting is more complex and can be done in n log n. So if you're going n squared, that's already too much. Okay, so what happened? Your phone died? Or your light ray is dead?
Can we delete the zeros?
But what is deleting? What does deleting mean? When you delete something from an array, what does that do?
The time complete so everything is O(n).
Exactly. And if you have n zeros, then you will be n squared.
N squared.
Okay, so you had a good idea.
Can 2 zeros count next to each other?
What's that? You could have 2 zeros next to each other. Yeah, so this could be this could be 0. Yeah. So now remember, this problem I just gave you is an easy problem, right? So that's why. I mean, some people end up spending the entire interview trying to solve this problem, like 35 minutes. But that means probably they will not pass the interview because
What's the expectation?
the expectation for me in an ideal performance is to solve it in 10-15 minutes. Which now we've been about like 7 minutes we've been spending on this. So yeah, I'll share the optimal solution. So the solution you gave is acceptable. Like when somebody gives that solution, I accept it. That's why I say this is a warm-up problem. I just want to use it as a time to just like solve it quickly and move on. We don't necessarily need to spend all the time on it. So I'll talk about what the solution. What's your name? What is it?
Dale.
Daniel?
Dale.
Dale.
D-A-L-E-R.
Dale. Okay, Dale. Yeah, it's better to spell it. Okay, so Dale, so he said it's kind of intuitive or simple approach is to say, okay, I can just move through the array from left to right and basically rewrite the array the whole time. Whenever I find something, if that something is a 0, skip it. I will keep that position empty to put instead of it a non-zero. So I will have 2 pointers, an I pointer that will move through the array from left to right, and a J pointer that will be held in each position to say if I should put a 0 or if I should put something instead of it. So when I find a 1, I say okay, 1 stays here, so move both elements. So then both the I and the J will move up. So start here, so J is here, I is here. So they all both move up. So then J becomes here, I comes here, and then we have a 3. We should move both of them up. 3 is a good number, we want to keep it. So J is here, I is here. So now we see a 0, say, actually, we don't like zeros. So we will keep moving the I, but we will keep the J here to say, this is an empty spot. We should put something else instead. So we move the I, we keep the J, we find another 0. We say, okay, we should not do nothing with J. J stays where it is. We come here, we find a 7. Now we can swap the 7 with a 0 with a J. So we put the 7 here, we put the 0 here, and then we move the J one more spot. So now if we have more elements down here, we will put them here. But we're done here. So now we are just simply return J, because we said we want to return the number of non-zero elements. So we have 1, 2, 3 elements, and the value of J is 3. So we just return J, and that's it. Now, once we explain the approach, probably most of you can write the code for it. So a lot of the times, the hard part of the interview was that, remember, step 3 is coming up with an approach that works. You can probably confidently write a for loop that will do this, and it will probably work. But the hard part is, okay, what is the approach I use? Now, there's something that is a little bit suboptimal about this problem, which is that, or about this solution, sorry, which is like if we want to be crazy and we want to really optimize everything. What will happen if I have an array that looks like this? Like, let's say there's like 10 to the 10th. So there's like, 10 billion elements in this array. And I only have 1 0. Just one little 0 at the beginning. So this code, what is it going to do? It's basically going to shift the entire array. It's going to rewrite the whole array. It's going to move the 1 here, and it's going to move the 2 here, and it's going to move the 3 here, and the 5 here, and so on. And it's going to do this rewriting of the array 10 billion times. But I only have 1 0. So can we do better than that? Can we write to the, if we say writing to the array is expensive, like let's say you have to make a handshake with a database, or you have to do something crazy to write to the array, and you have to do it 10 billion times for an array that has only 1 0. Can we think of a way to do less writes?
Should we keep the order of non-zero elements?
So that's the question here. Does the order matter? And I said, no, it does not matter. We don't care about.
So we can add, instead of 0 to 0, we can add the last element.
So exactly. So we can simply just move this element here. And now we solve the problem with only one operation, with one swap. Of course, we still have to move through the whole array to see there are no other zeros. But in terms of how many times we write to the array, we only write to it 1 time instead of 10 billion times. So this is an improvement. And in order to solve it this way, we have to actually change the approach.
We can do the same with the first solution. We can just start from the end and
Exactly.
start from the start and just keep the index of the end. And if we find the 0, just add the number to it.
Exactly. So that's exactly right. So the optimal solution is to have I come from the left and J come from the right and move them until they meet. And whenever we find a non-zero on the right and a 0 on the left, then we move them. We don't even have to move the 0 to the right side, because remember, we said we don't care about what happens on the right side. We only care that the non-zero is on the left. So if writing to the array is expensive, we actually can do this only in one write. We don't even need to put a 0 here. We can leave this original value, because we said we will ignore the right side of the array. So the solution for this becomes, with the right and left pointer, it becomes this. So we initialize the left pointer to be 0. We initialize the right pointer to be length minus 1. This is now in Python. and then we just write a while loop that is making sure that left and right have not crossed each other, and we just check. If the left pointer of the array is pointing to a non-zero, so if we're looking at non-zeros on the left side, just keep moving the left side, because non-zeros on the left is a good thing, so keep it. So if array left is equal to not equal 0, increments left. Otherwise, if the left side is pointing to a 0, that means we need to replace it with something. So let's keep that here, let's not move it. But let's now look at the right side. If the right side is looking at a 0, also that's good. We want the zeros on the right side, so just keep moving the right side closer to the middle, so we decrement it. Otherwise, if both of these are false, that means we have the left side looking at a 0, the right side looking at a non-zero. They should be swapped, or the one on the right should come to the left. So simply, we move the right one to the left, we increment right, we increment left, we decrement right, and we keep doing. And at the end of this, we have to figure out what to return. The return here doesn't show, but probably they will meet. So we just need to figure out, do we return left plus 1, left minus 1, right, whatever. We just need to find what will the value of left and right be at the end, and which one is going to represent the number of non-zero elements in the array. Make sense? Yeah. So how does this feel? Does this feel like a reasonable interview problem to you guys? Yeah. So you can see, with practice, this problem, and I interview people all the time and they solve it. They solve this problem in 10 minutes, 7 minutes, and then we go to the harder problem and we solve it. So how do they do it? How do they solve this problem so quickly? Well, probably they solve hundreds and hundreds of problems on LeetCode. And I don't say hundreds to exaggerate. You have to go on LeetCode, make an account if you don't have, or LeetCode, HackerRank, any of them, doesn't matter. Just find one of these and solve 200 problems. Now, the difficulty of the problems you should pick from these websites, try to get the middle band. So don't solve the really hard ones, because they're usually too hard to come in an interview. And don't solve the too easy ones. Now, if you're starting out, if you're a beginner still, it's okay to start with the easy to learn skills. But the interview type of problems will probably be somewhere in the middle. Sometimes they could be marked as easy, but they're like hard, easy ones. And sometimes they could be marked as hard, but they could be easy, hard ones. So try to find that middle band with like solving anywhere from the hard, easy problems to the easy, hard problems and the medium ones. Somewhere in that middle range is what will probably give you the best practice for interview problems. On LeetCode, this one may be marked easy or medium, I'm not sure. Probably easy. But I've seen some problems on LeetCode that are marked easy, and I was like, this one is hard. I've seen problems that are marked medium, but I was like, this one was easy. So it's it's not always very accurate. All right, how you guys feeling? Yeah? Excited? Yeah, you're all ready to work. So we're it's been almost 2 hours now. Let's wrap up. I just want to share one last thought with you. It's a quote, and then we can end. This one. Have you guys heard this one? It says, "There are better starters than me, but I'm a strong finisher." Have you heard it? You know who said this? No? No. It's this guy. He runs. He's a fast runner, fastest. Yeah. So it's Usain Bolt, and he's talking about starting and finishing. Probably he's talking about running, right? So he's saying like, there are 3 people who are better starting the race than me, but I finished strong. That's how he's the fastest man alive. He's broken so many records in the world. So he's saying I'm a strong finisher, and that's how I win the race, is by finishing strong. And I think it's a very interesting quote, or I think it's a very interesting metaphor, maybe for life, not just for running. Because if we think about all of us here, each one of us here has a different beginning or a different start to life. There's like 30 people here. Some of you may come from rich families. Some of you come from families who lived abroad. Some of you may be connected to fancy positions or have great networks. And that beginning will sometimes put us ahead of each other and puts us at a privilege. So I come from Iraq, and I used to think, I come from a really bad place. From back then, I grew up, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have internet, there was war when I grew up. I couldn't go to school for a long time, people were dying, all this stuff. And I used to think, I will never be successful because I started life behind. There are people who, they grew up going to Harvard, and their parents went to Harvard, and they go to Yale, and they go to MIT, and they go to all these fancy places. And so these are the ones that are going to be successful in life. And I'm not going to be very successful. And then, I worked hard, I got lucky sometimes. Sometimes I failed, sometimes I learned, sometimes I tried and failed and worked again and tried again and so on. And then life got moved on, and then now I work in a job that I would have never dreamt to work in it. And I think back to my old self and how I would have never thought I could achieve this or get here. And I think also about all the people I talk to and meet. And people, you guys, you maybe think, I come from Uzbekistan, my family doesn't have a lot of money, I don't have a lot of privilege. And we might hold ourselves back because of where we come from or our beginnings. But it doesn't have to be this way. And we can get as far as we want, we can beat everybody else and win first and finish strong, as long as we're persistent, as long as we're committed. And this quote to me is very meaningful, to think like, it doesn't matter what your beginning is, what matters is how you finish, and the strength with which you end the race. So, keep on solving your lead code problems, keep on practicing, keep on coming to GDG and to hackathons and coding competitions. And if you dream big, keep on dreaming, and don't let anybody tell you that, hey, these are not real dreams. It doesn't have to be you come to work at Facebook. Maybe you make the next Facebook. You can, we're in a world where you can start your own business in 5 minutes.
Destroy.
Yeah. You can replace Facebook with something you created from Samarkand. How amazing is that? Well, the conqueror of the world, Amir Timur, which he did a lot of things. Maybe some of them they're not so good, but he conquered the world, and he comes from Samarkand. So you never know. You never know who's going to be the next conqueror. Maybe one of you guys conquer the second district. But anyways, yeah. So this is my last thought. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to me for 2 hours.